So you probably watched the video where I told you not to sleep with the television on. Well, a lot of people think, okay, well, instead I'll just sleep with music on. That's fine. Well, there's a lot of similar problems with sleeping with the television on and sleeping and having music on. So let's talk about those. Whenever it comes to sleeping with music on, the brain is wired to interpret language. So that means that it is constantly listening, it is engaged, it is listening for information that it needs to act on. And so because of this, the language centers of the brain are active and they're lit up. And that is not exactly what it is that we need to be doing whenever we want to be falling asleep. Even if you're not listening to the music, your brain still is, and it's still active and engaged with the music. And that is going to be interfering with our ability to get a really good night's sleep. Again, if you watch the other video on sleeping with the television on, I also stand by that here is if you are going to be sleeping with music on, especially whenever it comes to music with lyrics, the brain is going to be trying to interpret language and it's not going to be able to get the best possible sleep and to get into those very deep stages of restorative sleep where a lot of really important functions are going to be happening. So that's one piece of it. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, I'll swap out for some instrumental music. That'll be fine. Classical music, that's great. I think that I've heard that that's a great thing to fall asleep to. Okay, I think I'm going to be a bubble buster here. What I also need to tell you is that whenever you're listening to instrumental music, yes, I'll give you that. It is less cognitively demanding. However, the brain then switches its focus and instead it's interested in listening to the rhythm, the melody, the patterns. It's really focused in on that and it really wants to predict what's going to happen next, especially whenever there are changes in tempo, in volume, in key. All those various different things are going to be interesting for the brain, and the brain wants to keep listening and paying attention to that rather than fully kind of shutting down, which is what one of the things that we kind of want it to do whenever we're asking it to go to sleep at night. Let me be clear that the brain never fully shuts down. The brain is actually incredibly active all night long. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we have a person who is actively awake and problem solving, and we put a cap with electrodes on their head. And we see what their brainwaves are doing. And we see that their brainwaves are actually very, very active. Obviously, they're awake, they're problem solving. Then we take somebody and they're in REM sleep and we put a cap with electrodes on them and we see what's happening. And in fact, we can see that REM sleep, the brain waves associated with that, and being awake and active and problem solving, these states of brainwave are very, very similar. And so there's kind of this myth that the brain is fully shutting down. It's not shutting down. It's actually very, very busy, but it should be busy on all of these nightly maintenance activities and things that it needs to be doing, like emotion regulation, like consolidating memories, lots of different things that should be happening. Instead, whenever we're listening to music or we're trying to sleep with the TV on, instead the brain is busy with these nonsense activities, things that it doesn't need to be engaged in. Instead, it needs to be working on these very active, important processes that it does throughout the night so that the next day you can be ready and alert and do what it is that you need to do because it's done all the functions that it needed to do all night long. So, what are some other things that you can do if you want to replace, you can't sleep in complete silence if that's you, I hear that a lot, and that's okay. I'm not asking you to do that. There are plenty of other options out there. So a few things that might be a nice option for you to replace music or television with would be nature sounds. Things like ocean, things like rain, different things like that will be really soothing to the brain. And those are natural sounds. Those are sounds that we would find in our environment. So that's not going to be disruptive for the brain at all. Another option that's very popular is white noise, pink noise, brown noise. There's lots of different colors of noise lately. And so pick what resonates most with you, and that will also be a nice option. A lot of times people tell me that they like to sleep with a fan or an air conditioner on, something that is kind of this dull, consistent noise that they can hear throughout the night. And that's great. That is going to be something that allows it to not be complete silence, because sometimes people have a real issue with that, but also we're not getting to the point of something that is very interesting and exciting for the brain. Two other things that I want to share that are very interesting, but they do require headphones. So first is going to be binaural beats, and this you have to listen through headphones. And binaural beats are very interesting if you've never heard about them. So one ear hears one tone, one ear hears another tone, and they come together in the brain and they make a very specific tone. And when you're looking at binaural beats and you're trying to decide maybe if you'd like to give these a go, there are various different ones that kind of promote different states. So as we're potentially talking about using binaural beats for sleep, maybe you would be looking for one that promotes rest and relaxation, because there are also binaural beats out there that are great for focus and for alert and if you're studying. So whenever you're looking for binaural beats, make sure that you are looking for one that's going to put you in a state of rest and relaxation. And then the other one, which is my favorite, is bilateral music. My favorite, and I'm going to link it down below, is Dr. David Grand, and he made this music specifically for brain spotting therapy, and we can certainly talk about that in another video. With the bilateral music, what's happening is that it is moving from one ear to the other, and again, you have to be wearing headphones in order for this music to be most effective. And what is happening as it's moving from one ear to the other is that it's activating the parasympathetic nervous response. So just to give you a little science lesson here, we have the autonomic nervous system, and it's got two branches. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and that is the fight or flight. That's what gets your heart rate up. That's what gets you out of the way of a moving car. That is really going to be activating. But then we've got the other side, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. And you've probably heard that is rest and digest. So that is helping bring us back down from this very activated state. So when we're talking about bilateral music, that is moving from one ear to the other, and its job is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that we just talked about. So that is going to be very soothing. And another way to think about it is kind of like if we would rock a baby to sleep, that motion, that's kind of what this music is doing with the hemispheres of our brain, is that it's rocking our brain to sleep, which is just really super cool. So I will list my favorite songs down in the playlist, and they're for free. Also too, whenever we're getting into something like this, as far as listening to something else like nature sounds or white noise or fan, those can all be listened to out loud. If you're gonna get the most bang for your buck whenever it comes to binaural beats or the bilateral music, then you do have to have headphones on. I highly recommend having something that's gonna be really soft against your ears, so that's not gonna be something that unintentionally wakes you up. And then with any of these sounds, especially when it comes to the bilateral or the binaural beats, I would recommend putting a sleep timer on. Just use this as a way to help you very gently fall asleep, and just experiment with it throughout the night. I don't want this to be something that you use every single night throughout the entire night. It's not a huge deal, but I would like to see you move towards something that you don't have to use every single night, or you kind of just use it for the first 10, 15, 30 minutes until you fall asleep. That would be the most ideal circumstance. But again, I think whenever it comes to finding something that works for you, it's just doing some trial and error, see what happens. There's a lot of free apps and free sounds out there, especially if you have a smart home device. You can just ask it to play ocean sounds or rain sounds. So there's going to be lots of different options for you to play with, especially if you're someone who can't tolerate silence whenever you sleep, or you've been sleeping with the television on and you heard me talk about how that's not a good idea. So we're trying to find some middle ground. So let's recap here today. What we talked about was whenever we are trying to sleep with music on, that's not a great idea, especially whenever it comes to music with lyrics, because that's activating the language centers of our brain, and the brain is just very interested. Even if we're not really listening to the music, the brain it's interested, it's wired to interpret language, and it's just going to interfere with our sleep. Very similarly, instrumental music or music without any type of lyrics still is very interesting to the brain, because the brain wants to know what's coming next. What are the patterns? What's the movement? What's the tempo? And it's trying to predict what is going to happen next. So even though it's less cognitively demanding than music with lyrics in it, it's still not allowing the brain to fully kind of shut down and do all those other very important nightly maintenance activities that we talked about. So a couple of other things for you to try, just to recap: nature sounds, various different colors of noise, a fan, bilateral music, or binaural beats. And again, I would recommend setting a sleep timer for any of these to try and not rely on it the entire night. But if that is something that you need to do, it is much less interfering with sleep compared to sleeping with the television on or sleeping with music with lyrics. Thanks for joining me for this sleep tip, and I'll see you in the next one.